What if the most popular food in America was built on a history nobody taught you? Not in school, not on the menu, not in a single Taco Bell commercial. And the people who actually created it, the ones who perfected every fold, every spice, every technique, ended up as the smallest players in the industry they built. This is the hidden history of the taco. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never look at one the same way again. Because here's what almost nobody knows. The taco didn't start in a restaurant. It didn't start in a food truck. It definitely didn't start at Taco Bell. It started underground, in a silver mine, in complete darkness.
And the people who first ate them weren't foodies. They were trying to survive the day. Stay with me, because this story is about to go somewhere you didn't expect. But before we go underground, here's something that should stop you cold. Some historians believe the tortilla, the foundation of every taco ever made, existed before the wheel was widely used across the Americas. Think about that. This flatbread, this simple circle of ground corn, older than some of the greatest engineering breakthroughs in human history. The indigenous people of Mesoamerica, the Aztecs, the Maya, didn't just grow corn, they considered it sacred. Their creation myths literally described corn as the material the gods used to make human beings. So when someone wrapped that sacred corn flatbread around food, that wasn't just lunch, that was civilization. Now, the word taco. Where does it actually come from? Here's where historians get into arguments. The most compelling theory takes us to 18th century Mexican silver mines. Workers used small paper-wrapped charges of gunpowder to blast through rock. They called these little explosive charges tacos, small, compact, powerful. And then, sometime around that same era, those same miners started wrapping food in tortillas to eat while they worked underground. Portable, practical, powerful. Basically, the original fast food, except instead of a drive-through window, there was a cave-in risk. The taco, one of the most beloved foods on Earth, may have been born in a mine shaft from people who had nothing but hard labor and a piece of corn dough. The taco made it out of that mine. It crossed borders, it crossed decades, and when it finally arrived in America, something happened to it, something that changed everything. Late 1800s, San Antonio, Texas. Mexican immigrants, mostly women, set up open-air food stalls in the city plazas at night. They cooked over open fires, lanterns flickering in the dark, the smell of chile and cumin drifting across the square. People came from everywhere, workers, soldiers, travelers, writers, tourists from the East Coast who had never tasted anything like it. These women became legends. They were called the chili queens of San Antonio, and their food, people described it as electric, unforgettable, life-changing. American journalist O. Henry, one of the most famous writers of that era, ate at their stalls and wrote about it. Their food was becoming famous, and that's exactly when the problems started. City officials began showing up. Complaints about sanitation, complaints about the fires, complaints about the crowds. And by 1937, after decades of harassment and restrictions, the chili queens were banned from the plazas entirely. Gone, just like that. The women who had built San Antonio's food culture from the ground up, erased from the very streets they'd made famous. But here's what makes this hit even harder. Just a few years later, upscale restaurants opened across San Antonio, selling Mexican-inspired food to tourists for 3 times the price. Same food, different hands. Very different outcome. But the craziest part of this whole story, the taco most Americans think is authentic, the crunchy, U-shaped hard-shell taco, was invented in the United States. and it doesn't exist in traditional Mexican cuisine, not even close. 1951, Downey, California. A man named Glenn Bell opens a small restaurant. He'd been watching Mexican food stands for years. He understood the appeal, he understood the flavors, and he built a system, a fast, cheap, scalable system to sell a version of that food to mainstream America. He called it Taco Bell. Now, to be completely fair, Taco Bell introduced millions of Americans to Mexican-inspired food for the very first time. That's real. That matters. But here's the tension. Glenn Bell took a centuries-old food tradition, simplified it, standardized it, put it in a hard shell that had never existed before, and sold it back to the world as the definition of what a taco was. Today, Taco Bell has nearly 8,000 locations worldwide. Over $12 billion a year in revenue. And somehow, the families who preserved, protected, and perfected that food for generations, the ones running small taquerias and street stands, became the smallest players in the very industry they helped create. Not because their food was worse, because they didn't have the capital, because they didn't have the connections, because the system was never designed for them to win at scale. Now, let's talk about some facts that will genuinely break your brain. Americans eat approximately 4.5 billion tacos every single year. That's over 12 million tacos every single day. Enough tacos, if you line them up shell to shell, to circle the entire earth multiple times. Let that land for a second. Tacos al pastor, arguably the most iconic taco style in Mexico, is not originally Mexican. It came from Lebanese immigrants. In the early 1900s, Lebanese and Syrian families arrived in Mexico, bringing with them the tradition of shawarma, meat slow roasted on a vertical spit. Mexican cooks adopted the technique, swapped lamb for pork, added dried chiles, achiote, and pineapple, and created something completely new. Something that became a cornerstone of Mexican food culture, a Lebanese technique transformed by Mexican hands into a Mexican icon. That's not theft. That's what food actually does. It travels, it evolves, it absorbs everything it touches. The hard-shell taco? Invented in the US for mass production. An authentic street taco in Mexico City uses 2 soft corn tortillas, simple toppings, grilled meat, raw white onion, fresh cilantro, salsa verde. No sour cream, no fluorescent orange shredded cheese, no iceberg lettuce. If you put a Taco Bell crunch wrap in front of a taquero from Oaxaca, he would look at you with genuine concern. In the early 2000s, Taco Bell launched a famous campaign featuring a Chihuahua saying, "Yo quiero Taco Bell." Mexican-American communities were furious, not just because of the stereotype, but because an entire culture's history, centuries of survival, creativity, and culinary genius had been reduced to a cartoon dog selling fast food. The campaign was pulled, but the conversation it started, that one's still happening. Here's what it all comes down to. Every taco, whether it's from a $2 street cart or a Michelin-starred restaurant, carries something invisible inside it. Thousands of years of indigenous knowledge. It was transformed, layer by layer, decade by decade, by every hand that touched it. And the most powerful thing about that? You can still choose whose version you support. The next time you have the choice between a drive-thru and a family-owned taqueria, the one run by a woman who learned everything from her grandmother, you're not just choosing food, you're choosing whose story continues. The taco survived colonization, erasure, industrialization, and a talking chihuahua, and it's still here, still being made by hand, still feeding people, still telling a story. If this changed how you see the food on your plate, subscribe now, because once you learn the hidden history behind everyday food, you start seeing the entire world differently. Like, share, and leave comments.